Welcome to Lead Pods, the official leadership podcast from USMB for pastors and church leaders, where our goal is to increase our impact together.
Hello, my friends. Welcome to episode 114 of the USMB Lead Pods. My name is Matt Ersman, and as always, so grateful to have some time with you today. Today, I have the honor of interviewing Pastor Matt Thrift, who is the pastor of Corner Heights MB in Newton, Kansas. He is relatively new there. He's only been there a few months, but has experience being an MB pastor in Utah before that, and he's from the Baltimore area originally. Matt is a really great guy. I really enjoyed my conversation with him, and if you don't know him yet, I think he's the kind of guy that you will really get to know and enjoy listening to very, very quickly. The main reason that we're talking with Matt today is that he actually just wrote and published a book called Follow, all about Christian discipleship. And in this episode, we talk about how that is a very timely topic, a very important topic right now, one that many of us in church leadership are very interested in trying to figure out how we can do a better job at that in our area churches. So Matt does a great job kind of lining out some history of how we've gotten to where we are at this place in American church history, some disciplines that we all need to continue focusing on in our walk with Jesus, but also how it's just a delicate balance that we don't want to make these things just a checklist of duties that we have to do, but he calls it the training wheels that get to a really effective relationship with Jesus in the long run. So I really do think you'll enjoy this conversation, and I think there's some good tools that you might be able to implement at your church as well. So without further ado, let's take a quick break, and then we'll get to Pastor Matt Thrift talking about discipleship and his book, Follow.
Opportunities for generosity abound on Giving Tuesday, December 3rd. USMB would be grateful for your designated gift for church planting, leadership development, or immigrant ministries through CORD. Last year, donor support helped Redemption Church in Owatonna, Minnesota, make its church accessible for its older members, funded a record year of Leadership Pipeline internships, and helped Christian Center The Hand of God in Hamilton, Ohio, begin a building project through CORD. You can make a lasting impact through an investment in USMB. Visit www.usmb.org to give on Tuesday, December 3rd.
All right, friends. Well, today I'm so glad to have Pastor Matt Thrift with us today. Matt is a pastor at Corner Heights in Newton. As he comes before that, he was in Utah for a little while, and he's got a wide background we'll kind of explore a little bit today. But Matt recently published a book called Follow, all about discipleship. So we're going to dive into that in this episode as well. So Matt, thank you so much for joining us today. Great to have you with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on here. I'm excited to have some conversation about discipleship and the book and just the USMB world in general. Always a fun one for me, so appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Well, it's great to have you. And I know you've been kind of in USMB world for a little while, but you're relatively new at Newton. So if people haven't had a chance to meet you yet, can you give us a quick rundown of your background, where you came from, what you're doing now? What's kind of your brief overview of who you are?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up, actually, I like to say I grew up outside of Baltimore because it's the only city in Maryland that anyone knows.
Right.
So that's helpful for anyone who doesn't know. For anyone who's a real Marylander fan, lived there before, I grew up in Taneytown, Maryland. So good 45 minutes, hour away from Baltimore City, closer to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania than anything else. But grew up out there. Met my wife working at a Southern Baptist summer camp, kind of grew up in that world myself. And we had an amazing time living out there. Love that area. Still have family out there. But about 6 years ago, I was having a conversation, I guess a couple years prior to that, having a conversation with someone and just kind of airing some of my theological thoughts, somewhere that maybe I could find a better home for me theologically. Mm-hmm. And through that conversation, a friend of mine had suggested, "Hey, have you ever checked out the Mennonite Brethren?" And I was like, "No, I live in Maryland. I've never heard of the Mennonite Brethren." Like,
right.
I thought Mennonites just wore bonnets. Like, probably not appropriate, but accurate. And so through that conversation, I started looking stuff up, and I found South Mountain Community Church out in St. George, Utah. Is actually the campus I worked at, but they're a multi-site church all across the state. And so we packed up our bags, moved out there. I think I went out to candidate at that church, and then we were moved into St. George 17 days later. So we went full throttle. Yeah, maybe a bit quick, but it was really nice. Had an amazing time working out there. Some really awesome things happening with that part of the MB world out in Utah, and just loved it out there. But kind of some stuff changed in our lives, and we were looking for something that we needed to kind of take a step into a new season of ministry, find a new place. And I realized that when we moved to Utah in the first place, I guess we skipped over like the majority of the Southern District, didn't realize there were churches in Kansas or anywhere closer to Maryland. And so I went online, found the job listing for Kerner Heights. It was super excited, and the rest, I guess, is the past 6 months is history. So we've been loving it out here, really getting to get to know people. I've got my wife, Hannah. We have 3 wonderful children. They're 7, 5, and 3. So they're really enjoying the Newton school system. They genuinely are excited to go to school every day, which is new and a welcome change.
Oh, good. Awesome, man. Well, that's very cool. And for our listeners, if you haven't met Matt has a pretty epic mustache. So if you're ever at an MB conference, you see a young dude with a great facial hair, that's probably Mr. Thrift. So love it, man.
Yeah, I've got quite a few tattoos and a mustache, so I look a little distinct in the MB world. But yeah.
I love it. We need more of it, man. Bring it on. Bring it on. More tattoos and more facial hair. I love it. So Matt, this is kind of off topic a little bit, but I'm just curious. You said you were kind of in the Southern Baptist world, but you kind of theologically were drawn to MBs. Do you mind if I ask, like, what about MBs kind of attracted you? What about it was something that was appealing to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of started out, I know the hot button term nowadays would be deconstruction. People like to kind of break down the things that they grew up with. And that's both a thing that I think is necessary in some senses, while also being really problematic if it's taken too far, not building back up and rebuilding on the firm foundation of Jesus. But for me, I kind of grown up, I mean, we were in a lot of non-denominational churches. My dad, I joke with him, and he'll love that I say this in a podcast, but I joke with him that he'd be like a 19-point Calvinist if he could be. Just very reformed, and nothing wrong with that in any way. There's still a lot of pieces of that I resonate with. However, growing up in that side of things, one of the things that really kind of bothered me about the churches that I had found myself around was just kind of the peace-loving element being missing from a lot of the congregations I had seen. And it's certainly not indicative of all Southern Baptist or Southern Baptist adjacent churches, but in my experience, it was what I was finding a lot of. And so as I started reading more Anabaptist authors, seeing, hey, we actually have a tradition of trying our best to love people and truly just hold to what the Bible says, that be our foundation for things. So I had started looking into different Anabaptist traditions, and the Mennonite Brethren was one that had what I saw as a faithful view of sexuality and gender, a faithful view of a lot of these scriptural hot topics, while also holding to loving your neighbor, and that still being a core piece of who we are. And that was something that really attracted me, because I think I grew up in a lot of spaces where theology was super important, but they would miss the practicality of using like boots on the ground Christianity. And so the Mennonite Brethren context offered, at least from the outside, and then for my past few years inside of it, has offered a really safe, good landing place to be able to actually be the hands and feet of Jesus and encourage that in our congregations. So that was a huge one for me.
Oh, that's cool, man. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. I'm always intrigued by people who are kind of, in MB circles, we have a lot of people who are kind of born and raised, right? So it's kind of fun for me to hear what attracts people who weren't in that situation. So appreciate you sharing that. So today we're going to talk most of the rest of our time about your recent book. It's called Follow, about discipleship. So tell us more about that, Matt. Like what's the kind of the genesis of the book and what led you to writing it? And let's start there.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, kind of like the context that I had found myself in for years of growing up and growing out into my own faith and kind of learning what that looked like for me. I saw that we had this kind of negative view a lot of times in the context that I grew up in. We had a pretty strong negative view of growing churches, which felt counterintuitive, but I think it was also pretty accurate. I know a lot of us who are in smaller churches, and what that even means, I guess, is kind of up to interpretation nowadays. But a lot of us who find ourselves in smaller, more tight-knit congregations would sit back and we would judge the quote unquote mega church down the street, and we would be like, oh, they must be watering down the gospel somehow. And for me in my young years, I heard that so often that I kind of internalized it as, I guess if a church is growing, it means that the gospel is being watered down, and therefore the gospel must not be attractive, because if only growing churches are watering down the gospel, I guess we're the gospel must just be miserable for all of us. And it didn't matter how many teachings I heard otherwise. That was kind of what I had internalized, just constantly hearing the complaining about that. And so for me, I had moved into multiple churches that were much more outsider focused, much more like seeker friendly, kind of being the big term in the 90s and into the 2000s. And I saw a lot of beauty and growth. And I love that heart of like reaching your community, caring about the place that God has planted you. But I also saw that in that, discipleship was so very much harder, because I found myself working at a campus with over 1,000 people every Sunday morning and a handful of staff. And I would be walking through Walmart, and someone would come up and they'd say, hey, we heard about your daughter's medical condition. We're praying for you. And I'm looking at them like, I truly don't know who you are. I really appreciate it, but I can't be a good pastor of so many people that I don't know their names, don't recognize faces, that sort of thing. And so for me, I had started to try to think through, how can we, no matter what size church you are, whether you've got enough staff to reach all of your community or you don't, how can we really dig into discipleship and take this farther than where we are currently in a lot of our churches? And as I started talking with people about it, I realized, this is a very Mennonite Brethren, Anabaptist belief. Like, we don't exist just to share the gospel. That's a huge part of what we do. But we also aren't just okay with people saying, hey, we have 200 new salvations this week. We want to also go walk with those people, because Jesus's call to the Great Commission isn't go make believers, it's go make disciples. And that takes more time and effort and energy and uncomfortable relationship at times, but it's absolutely what we're called to. So it's kind of born out of, I don't think frustration is the right word, but kind of a concern that a lot of the churches that I had seen in my life, not just worked at, but seen in different circles, were really good at kind of sharing the gospel. And then we were struggling. All of us wanted discipleship, but struggling to figure out how to make that not just a checklist, but actually a journey, and how do we walk with people through that. So about 6 months ago, I set out to start writing. I'd been writing a different book that's not out yet. One day, hopefully it will be. But about 6 months ago, I was like, hey, I've got all this material I've had saved on my computer for years. I want to start actually working through that and turning it into something. So it's kind of where the book has come from.
Nice, man. Well, that's awesome. Yeah, I'm excited to dive into it and learn some more about it, because I think it's a resource that I think we can all benefit from. So we should probably start kind of at the beginning. And I know we've got a lot of pastors and church leaders listening, but just to make sure we're all on the same page, people might have slightly different definitions. So let's start off with discipleship. How do you define discipleship, both just personally and in your book? What's kind of the main part of what you're defining here?
Absolutely. So I look at discipleship, and kind of like right in the beginning of the book, I've got genuinely like the question, what is discipleship? What does that look like for us? How do we walk that out in our lives? And the idea, kind of as I said at the beginning, that I think many of us have adopted is this idea unintentionally, but kind of that discipleship looks like a checklist, that it feels like, okay, if I pray the right way, I give the right amount of money, I do the right amount of service, I show up to church every Sunday, well, clearly then I'm a disciple. And I wanted to kind of flip that on its head a little bit, kind of look into what it means. So the description that I offer in the book of a disciple is kind of first the dictionary definition of disciple, which is just a person who lives out and shares with others the teachings of a person or an institution. And looking at it that way, one of the interesting pieces to me was kind of the realization through writing this book that we're all disciples of something, someone, some institution, whatever else it is, whether we realize it or not. I think if you talk to the average person walking down the street and you ask them if they're a disciple, they probably would not. I mean, unless they're a Christian and they've grown up in church and they know the vernacular, they probably wouldn't say yes. However, we live in a day and age where people are certainly disciples of whatever news source they happen to listen to, whatever political pundit they find the most solace in. And we do that with everything. We've got disciples. I'll call myself a cautionary disciple of Apple products, because Lord knows I own about 1,000 of them, and I want to buy the new one when it comes out. Like we follow certain brands, certain characters, and we base a lot of choices around that I think ultimately reshape the way that I was thinking of discipleship, because inherently growing up, I had always thought, like I said, if I pray the right way, say the right words, attend the right meetings, I'm just naturally a Christian. I'm a disciple. And so my definition of discipleship is just simply, we ought to be, as Christian disciples, ones who are following and understanding and replicating the teachings of Jesus, no matter where that leads, that should be first and foremost in our lives.
That's a great definition. And it's a lot of these things, it's funny because when we say them out loud, it's kind of like, well, yeah, duh, that's what we're supposed to be doing. Like if we call ourselves Christians, well, yeah, we should be following Jesus and do what he tells us to do and live the way he taught us to live. It's kind of one of those things. Sometimes I think we overcomplicate it, but even though it's simple, it's very hard to do, practically speaking, right? A lot of being a disciple of Jesus is not easy. We'll dive into that here in just a minute, but I don't know if this is anecdotal or if there's any, I don't know if we could prove this at all, but it seems like, at least in my circles, there's kind of an increased focus on discipleship right now. And you kind of mentioned that earlier, kind of 90s, 2000s, maybe in the kind of the height of the seeker era, maybe that time was a little bit more focused on evangelism, and we wanted the big crowds, we wanted high conversion rates. That was kind of what we went for, a lot of churches anyway. Late 90s, early 2000s, that was kind of the model. And I don't know if the time we're in right now is kind of a direct result of that, where now I think a lot of people are just hungry for, okay, I'm in this thing. Now, what do I do? Right? Again, I don't have any evidence other than just kind of anecdotal stories. What do you think about that? Do you think there's any truth to that, or what would you say about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all I can offer is anecdotal as well. But I mean, growing up in church, seeing how that works, seeing how that's played out, I think it's very true. And I think the hard part is that as pastors, as leaders, even just as regular church attender growing up, like it was easy to create the delineation between like seeker sensitive churches and non-seeker sensitive, and one always wants to be better than the other. And I think the balance and kind of the tension we ought to hold is like, we should in fact be sensitive to our communities, not watering things down to make them more palatable, but realizing that we have a infectiously beautiful gospel that we get to be part of. We get to partake in that, and people actually want that if we're honest about it. So churches should be growing. Churches should be reaching their community. There's nothing wrong with any of that. We shouldn't just throw the baby out with the bathwater. But there were many churches that I think had focused so heavily on simply the numbers and attendance and baptisms as a qualification of understanding that they're actually doing well, and kind of missed the call to discipleship in the process of that. Whether it was by their own choice or by accident is obviously up for debate among many, and what church you're talking about and all of that. However, it changed the way that I think the American church looks, and there's a lot of people my age and a little bit older, a little bit younger, who I think experienced seeing church as more of a thing that you go to be entertained, and less of a community that you're part of. And I think in the midst of that, we lost discipleship in a lot of places. I think there's been a big pendulum swing back to discipleship. I don't think that means that we should abandon reaching our communities either, because that would be the wrong pendulum swing, but we should hold it to intention. Like we should be able to have both, honestly, because Jesus did a pretty good job with reaching anyone he talked to and absolutely everyone, while also discipling them, saying, hey, come follow me, come see what I'm doing and be part of this, not just watch it once a week on a Sunday morning. And so I think we can have both, thankfully. But yeah, I do think it's a reactionary swing because of the way that many of us grew up and saw that played out.
And it's too bad. We kind of always default to this, I think, where some churches, it seems like some churches are really great at evangelism, but they maybe fall short in discipleship and vice versa. But yeah, like you said, like the Christian life is both of those things. And hopefully one leads to the other and vice versa, right? We need both pieces of this.
Absolutely. I was going to say, I think in a sense there's even, and this is something that I kind of get nerdy about, trust me, but I think even in the architecture of the church building, when you look at how different it's changed over the years, I can recall like churches I grew up going to that were much smaller. The sanctuary was a decent size. It housed all the people it needed to house, plus had room for guests, had room for reaching our community. But we also had classrooms. We also had extra spaces and a fellowship hall and all of these things. And in one of my seminary classes, I got to write an article on the decline of fellowship halls in churches and kind of following how that follows the church's actual view in media, in the community, all of that sort of thing. And I thought it was really interesting because I've traveled around a good bit around the country, been to a lot of churches, and a lot of modern church buildings built in the mid to late 90s reflect a gigantic sanctuary and no classrooms, and a gigantic sanctuary and no fellowship hall, no area for actually having community being fostered. And I found it just kind of an interesting connection point where I'm looking back at some of the things that I've been in churches where we wanted to have more of that discipleship drive, but our building actually prohibited us from being able to do the ministry we wanted to do because it was built with a Sunday-centric mindset instead of a discipleship mindset. And so I was encouraged that there was a church I was at in Denver this past weekend, and I walked in and their sanctuary was huge, really big area. I mean, there's thousands of people that attend this church, but they also had over 200 classrooms and they had 2 gymnasiums and all of this. And I mean, granted, we're talking about much bigger church, much larger budget than I'm used to, that's for sure. But it was encouraging to see, hey, this is a church that's building is literally saying, we care about not just Sunday morning, but also what you're doing with the rest of your week. And I think a lot of the Mennonite Brethren churches I've been around reflect, we want community. We have classrooms, we have a gym, we have these pieces that we want people to be using throughout the week. And I think it's a beautiful reflection of where we come from and where we ought to be headed. Continuing to view it that way is encouraging to me.
Yeah, you're so right. I think that maybe isn't super intuitive, at least initially, but yeah, how we arrange our buildings shows what we elevate, what we prioritize, right? So yeah, that's a good thing to think about.
Absolutely. Yeah, if you're building a church building and you're listening to this, take that. No, I'm just joking.
Definitely. No, that's important. That's super important. Well, Matt, you said something a few minutes ago, which I think is really important for us to go back to. So I think when we talk about discipleship or when we talk about spiritual disciplines, maybe specifically, there's always this rub of like, we don't want it to become a checklist. You mentioned that a minute ago. A lot of people kind of default to, if I'm a good Christian, I'm going to pray this number of times a day. I'm going to read this many chapters of the Bible. I'm going to be in the physical church building this many times. It's really hard not to default to that, right? But I think we know,
absolutely,
like that's not what it's supposed to be, but that's kind of where we always end up, right? Whenever we talk about discipleship, we kind of end up going there, even though we know that the religious, kind of Pharisee aspect of that's not what we want, right? So I know that's something that you wrestle with in the book. So can you tell us about that? How do we do what we're supposed to do without it becoming just a checklist?
You're right. It is the rub. It's the difficult part of the conversation on discipleship is like, it would be so much easier in a culture, which we certainly do have, that really likes to have clear, delineated steps. And I love that personally. Like I think there's so much help in having, here's a piece of paper I can hand somebody that tells them how to be a disciple. And it's got pray and fasting and doing these things, and all of a sudden, yeah, you're just a disciple. Like, I wish in some sense it was just that simple. The only problem is I think our world reflects that it's not that simple truly at the end of the day. So for me, what I've tried to say to people is I try to think of some of those things almost like training wheels, if that makes sense. There's benefit to setting aside, because we're creatures of habit, and we're not naturally going to set aside time in our morning to get up and pray. We're not going to do it if we're just left to our own devices. So there's benefit to, hey, I'm going to set this almost like a checklist way of starting out. I want to pray X amount of minutes every day. I want to read my Bible X amount of minutes. And I want to have that as sort of this repetitious thing that I can remember to do, which might be meaning set a reminder on your phone and view it like a checklist for a couple weeks. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's a good way to start. The difficulty is if we set that reminder, we get up and we pray for 7 days out of the week, and then we look back on that last week and we go, wow, I was really a good Christian last week. That's where I think the pieces start to fall apart, because we need to realize we're no better than anyone else because we actually accomplished what we were setting out to do, or that sort of thing. And I think, unfortunately, that's what I more so am referring to when I mean a checklist being the negative thing. Is I grew up thinking that if I just did this enough times, I was like a different level of Christian than someone else. Like, okay, I prayed and I tithed, so now I'm a better Christian. And I think that's an inappropriate, a borderline or maybe past borderline heretical view to think of ourselves as better than someone else because we're doing something. Yeah. So I think the setting of habits can be a benefit, but to view it as training wheels just to get us into the rhythm where we find ourselves not waking up and turning off the alarm so we can get 15 more minutes of sleep. We find ourselves actually waking up and desiring to be with God. And I think the beauty of the gospel is that will happen. Like, again, I mean, I've been around church for the last 10 years, working in churches for the last 10 years. And in that time, it sounds silly because when you tell somebody, oh, you're actually going to want to wake up earlier, you're actually going to want to stay up late and pray, no one believes that right off the bat. Understandably, they're like, yeah, sure, it's going to be a checklist for the rest of my life. But I promise you, at some point, it's not. You actually desire that, and it becomes part of your rhythm, part of your life. And I think there's beauty in that gets us out of the checklist phase and into the relationship phase of things. So yeah, it's definitely a piece I hold in tension because it's easy to get caught up in checking them off. Even when I wrote the book, you'll notice each of the chapters are different practices, which could look a whole lot if you went to the table of contents like a checklist. Like, okay, I'm supposed to do this, then do this, then do this. And then at the end, I'll be a disciple. And I keep reiterating throughout the book, that's not the goal. It's not that, okay, you did all of these things perfectly. Nobody's doing all of them perfectly. It's about adding all of these things into our lives and reorienting everything else through prayer, reorienting everything else through fasting, through Sabbath, through rest. All of that's a way of viewing the rest of the world around us when we do it properly.
That's good, man. And speaking of checklists, I think you point this out in the book too, that is the whole roadmap idea. Like we don't really arrive. Like we don't ever check the box. Like, okay, now check. I'm a disciple of Jesus. I'm done with that. Now I can move on to something else, right? It's something that we have to continue doing. We have to kind of, the process is more important than the destination, right? Can you talk about that a little bit? Because I think by itself, becoming a disciple, if we're not careful, that by itself could be a checkmark thing, right? But can you talk about how it's a lifelong pursuit and how it's important for us to keep working on this, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, again, seeing Christians who have been Christians for a long time, I realized very quickly that there's the temptation inside of all of us to feel like we've gotten somewhere. So I've many times in my life preached on evangelism and talking to a room full of people. Usually the 20 and 30-year-olds will come up afterwards and they are fired up and they're excited to go share the gospel. And then I meet with somebody who's a bit older and have the same conversation with them. And they're like, well, you know what? I feel like I've lived my life, I've done my thing, and now I'm just here to kind of rest. And there's nothing wrong inherently with wanting that side of things. But my encouragement to, especially to older believers, but to any of us, truly, it might be younger, but people who have been around church for a long time, is that we don't arrive at a place where we're no longer held to the same expectation of discipleship, discipling others, where we're no longer held to evangelism. We're still ought to be doing that, as Jesus would say. And so I think we have this temptation in ourselves. And I, again, growing up in church, I was a Christian homeschooled kid. So like I was pretty good at following rules. Honestly, it wasn't often all that hard. I don't like rules very much. I don't think most of us do, but I grew up learning how to follow rules quite well. And I felt like I was pretty good at it. And it gave me kind of an arrogant view of myself, thinking, okay, well, I'm a good Christian because I'm not doing the stuff that my friends are doing. So I must be doing this right. But then I would be at home alone myself and feel all of the guilt and the shame and the weight of life on top of me because I knew it wasn't true. I wasn't a perfect person in any way. And I think the temptation, as you said, is to view that this is some sort of destination we can arrive at. And the reality is it's simply not. It's a continual journey we're all called to, no matter what our age or our length of relationship with Jesus has been.
No, that's really good. That's well said. And speaking of that, I think there's kind of different kind of challenges and I don't know if rewards is the best word, but like there's some parts about Christianity that I think are almost easier when you're new. Like if you are a brand new Christian, some of this stuff is, again, it's new, it's exciting, you're ready to jump in, and it's, you have this kind of energy about you. And there's maybe other things that are harder in that stage. But then as you get older and the longer you're in the church, I think some things, again, get easier and some things get harder. And one thing I know, I think it's true for me, I think it's probably true for a lot of people, that whether it's maybe prayer, reading the Bible, some of these things, the longer we do it, if we're honest, it might be kind of harder to get that same kind of energy out of reading the Bible if we've already read it a million times before, right? So I think you talk about how your goal is to kind of have a living conversation with God when you're reading the Bible or prayer. That's kind of one of the ways that you talk about. How have you personally been able to kind of keep those things in your own spiritual walk fresh and alive? If you've been on church staffs for 10 years, you've been a Christian most of your life, how do we keep this energized and rejuvenated in our spiritual journeys?
Personally, kind of like my way of viewing it, and it's not an earth-shattering realization. It's something many pastors have said for many years, but I always think through the idea of like my relationship with my wife. We've been married for, tomorrow will be 9 years, actually, is our wedding anniversary tomorrow. And so for us, I think of the idea that I could, and this is not an encouraged view in any way, shape, or form. Anyone who's married knows this is not what we ought to do. But I could just provide for my wife, make sure that all of our needs are met, not have conversation with her, sit at the dinner table, and we could even enjoy sitting there being in each other's presence, I suppose, but not have conversation, not continue that relationship, continue it growing. And ultimately, every time I've ever heard anyone talk about that or asked people their thoughts on whether that would be a healthy relationship or not, we all know that's not a healthy relationship. It requires communication. It requires things, honestly, changing in some sense. Not that God is changing in any sense whatsoever, but that our deepening relationship with him is going to sharpen us like iron sharpening iron. And so as I think through it, there's definitely times in my life. And if I was on here and pretended that I have got the most vibrant, amazing prayer life and scripture reading life of any human being ever, all the time, never have any struggles, I would be lying. That's just not true. We all struggle with this all the way through. However, when I talk with my wife and I'm truly open and honest with her and we have deep conversation and we walk through the difficulties of life that change all the time, having 3 kids and moving across the country multiple times, we have a lot of things to talk about. And sometimes those conversations are really encouraging and other times they're challenging. That's what relationship looks like. And I think for me, the way that I challenge myself to still enjoy prayer, still find solace in speaking with my Creator, my Lord, is to be able to just be open and honest about what's going on. That I know God's not afraid of my frustrations or my fears or anything else. And when I talk with God about those things, I feel that deeper connection. I understand more of, hey, you know what? This has been a challenging season in my life, and I'm going to be honest with you, God, about it. It's not like I can hide it from you anyway. Like,
Yeah,
hey, I want to come to you fully honest, no boundaries. God can handle it. Have that conversation, and at the end of that time, I'm like, man, that really is what prayer is supposed to feel like. Now, there's other times where I'm like, everything's great. Thank you so much, God, and it's wonderful. That's okay too. But I think just being honest about where we are in our lives, continuing to seek that, there are times where it's going to feel like just the thing that we should be doing. There are definitely moments where, as much as I can write a book on why it's not a checklist, where I still think of it as a checklist in my mind because that's ingrained in there, unfortunately. But when I step back and realize this is relationship, this is what I get to have with Jesus, that's something that really reshapes my understanding of who God is, and I appreciate that aspect. So yeah, I think just consistency, but again, holding that intention of not just being a box to check off, but a thing that we enjoy doing because we know it's beneficial.
Yeah, that's good, man. Yeah, that's hard. I think it's hard for all of us, but yeah, it's a good lifelong pursuit for all of us.
It is. It is. That's absolutely true. Yeah, there's no way around that.
Yes. So we've kind of been talking in the past few minutes about kind of prayer and Bible reading, but I know you also tackle, worship and rest and fasting, like all those other things as well. So I'm just curious, as you were putting this together, as you're, studying scripture, researching, or just thinking and processing, what were some of the kind of, I don't know if you had any kind of new thoughts as you were putting this together, or what was something that you learned about one of these habits, or out of all of those, was there something that was kind of new to you as you were studying and writing?
When it comes to the overarching theme of discipleship, I think the biggest realization for me, I kind of already said it towards the beginning of our conversation, but one of the biggest things that reshaped for me was just realizing that everybody's the disciple of something, and therefore we need to be really careful that what we're being discipled by is still Jesus, because it's really tempting to be a Christian, and I don't think that people are losing their salvation left and right. That's not my conversation. That's not what I'm talking about. But it's easy to be discipled by multiple things and not realize that we're not just being discipled by Jesus anymore. I think that was a big realization for me. A lot of the current discontentment and unsettled conversations within every church in America when it comes to politics, when it comes to world events at the moment, I think a lot of that would be so much easier if discipleship was the way that we viewed those things. If we saw, hey, I want to be discipled by Jesus, and that might mean that I am more inclined to feel some sort of commitment to this political party over this one, or whatever else that happens to look like. I mean, that's between you and God, personal thing. But that would be understandable. What I've seen as a pastor that's scary and really not biblical in any sense is that we have a lot of people in our congregations who are not just being discipled by Jesus, they're being discipled by CNN and Fox News. They're being discipled by the left and the right, and they don't realize that. If we had people leaving our churches because they were going to become the Buddhist or Muslim or whatever else, we would see that. We'd realize it very quickly. We'd have conversation with people, but instead it's kind of this slow underlying discipleship of culture that was really kind of eye-opening for me when I started writing the book, thinking through, hey, this is a bigger problem than just a little bit different views. There's some actual stuff that's unhelpful and unbiblical happening here. Not in every case, but in plenty, unfortunately. Right. So that was a huge thing for me. I think when it comes to the other practices there was definitely the constant conviction that I am awful at rest. I am awful at Sabbath. I am not good at that whatsoever. I had someone come in the other day into the office here at Kerner, and they said, "Hey, what's your day off?" And I said, "Well, technically my day off is Fridays, but I'm also here on a Friday." So that tells you how that's going. I'm not good at setting that time for me to truly follow Jesus and follow his lead and rest. I'm much better at trying to hold things myself and make sure that, like, what's going to happen if I take that one day off? The whole thing's going to fall apart. We're not going to have lights on Sunday morning. Things aren't going to work. And that's simply not true. I don't hold things together anyway. So it was a big personal realization for me. There was a quote I didn't end up including in the section on Sabbath and rest, but it was something that I found very helpful through researching. I read a couple books by a Jewish rabbi named M. Heschel. And one of his quotes, he talks about the idea that those who work with their hands should Sabbath with their minds. Those who work with their minds ought to Sabbath with their hands. And that was a huge, not biblical, not saying that, but it was a huge realization for me that I can cut my grass and chop wood at home. And that actually for me is restful, because I spend far too many hours sitting in this office using my brain and I'm not resting with my hands. And for me, that's been a helpful piece of things, something that's really kind of added some vibrancy to my Sabbath when I actually take it. So I think that was a big one for me as well. Just kind of that realization that it's necessary. It's helpful.
Definitely. And I think, again, maybe this is cultural or not, I don't know, but I think pretty much everybody listening resonates with that. Like Sabbath and resting, I think our culture is just so bad at that. But I too, I've heard that quote before, and I find a lot of value in that. And that, I think it's true. We need to rest with whatever we're not doing the rest of the day, rest of the week. That's been super helpful for me. So that's cool to hear. Same thing for you.
People would tell me when I said I struggled with Sabbath, they'd say, "Oh, go read a book, sit on your couch and read a book." And I thought, that's what I do in my office, man. I'm right. I'm kind of, my brain's tired. My hands are not. So yes, for me, like, working outside, going to the gym, those are pieces that I do actually find more rest and connection with God through that, because I'm not using my brain anymore to the same extent, at least. Yeah, so dude. It's been a big one for me.
That's the same for me. I resonate with that wholeheartedly. So that's good. That's really good. Okay, well, I got maybe a couple more questions here as we're kind of maybe start to wrap up here, Matt. But I know you spent a little bit of time, I think you were talking about the church in Corinth. I know a lot of the times we think of the cities that Paul was writing these letters to, that was so long ago, culture was so different. I think we kind of tend to think like, oh, that was a different time. And the truths are still timeless, but at the same time, it's kind of hard for us to put ourselves in the same shoes as the church leaders who would have been receiving these letters for the first time, right? But a lot of what we read is so timeless and so relevant to us today. I know you spent some time thinking about that. What life in the church in Corinth looked like versus today, maybe some of the other early churches. So would you agree? I think we have this tendency to think that was so long ago, but the struggles are still the same, right? What are some of the principles that you were discovering as you were studying that?
Absolutely. Yeah. It is the temptation to think, oh man, we live in such and we do, it's a fast changing world. Lots of things are different. I understand that, but I think that tendency goes too far at times where we think, man, people must be different than they were 2,000 years ago. I've even heard people kind of romanticize the idea of like, oh, I just wish I could like go back in time 50, 60, 70 years. I wish I could go back in time 1,500 years so I could just live in this less distraction-filled world. And I just consistently think the problems are the same. We're pretty unchanging creatures in that sense. Unfortunately, we might not be bowing down to golden calves today, but we're certainly bowing down to the golden calves that exist in our society. We find every excuse. I know in my own life, find every excuse I can to fill my time with something, to not have to focus on whatever is going on around me. And I think that the problems, the vessels that those idols have come to us in are incredibly different Yeah, it's not a golden cow. It's a Vizio TV nowadays, but like,
Yeah.
but it's the same heart issue. It's the same thing.
Right.
We're the same people that we were thousands of years ago. So I found a lot of help in looking at kind of an exegetical study of these cities, what's going on there, and how that really does relate to us today. Because like you said, it's easy for us to go, oh man, like Corinth was crazy. Like they had these awful things happening, and I would never, ever do that. But then all like being a Christian in Corinth must have been so much easier. I think people talk about often thinking through like, man, the disciples just made some kind of stupid choices sometimes. You read through and you're like, and I'll be the first one to say, there's many times I'm reading through the New Testament and I get to a section and I'm like, dude, you've been hanging out with Jesus. How are you making this same bad mistake? But I'm hanging out with Jesus too. I have the Holy Spirit inside of me, and I still make the same mistakes. We might have 2,000 years removing us from early church history, but we have the same struggles with different faces today, is I think all it really is. And so, yes, I think that was a helpful piece for me, was kind of tying, look, we're this book that sits on our shelves and gets dusty at times is not something that should be sitting there. This is something that's living, that is breathing, that continues to speak to us today, just the same as Paul was saying back then. Of course, there's exegesis, there's understanding specific things might have been for specific times, and I completely agree with that. But the overarching themes of how the world works really hasn't changed in thousands of years. We live in the same place. We're the same kind of people. So yes, it was a huge one for me.
Yeah, that's both helpful and discouraging, isn't it? Like, we are the same people, but oh my goodness, we're the same people making the same mistakes.
Absolutely. I think of this story when the disciples run and go wake up Jesus from his nap, calm the storm. Yeah. And I think, oh my goodness, like these guys had Jesus on the ship with them. What are they worried about? Like, seriously, that's insane. Also, I have Jesus with me, and I still try to take control of things every single day. I still try to make sure my ship isn't sinking and the storms aren't a brewing. Right. Instead of just resting and finding that peace, I think is highly pertinent today still.
Yep. Nothing new under the sun, right? Nothing new.
Amen.
Well, Matt, this has been great, man. I want to encourage people to check out your book, follow. I think if you search for Matt Walker Thrift, that's your official author name there. So if you look it up, is it on Amazon? Where else can we find it, Matt?
Yep. It's definitely on Amazon. If you are local to the Wichita and Wichita adjacent area, I'm sure some of the listeners are, it will be in a bunch of different bookstores around the area. I've got a release party over at the Faith and Life bookstore, so it'll be over there in Newton for the foreseeable future. They'll always have some copies, as well as some of the Barnes & Noble in the Wichita area should have it, that sort of thing. I'm working on trying to get it everywhere. So if you've got connections and you're listening and you want my book in Barnes & Noble near you, let me know. But with that being said, Amazon's probably the easiest place, fastest way to get it. So yeah, that one's always available on there.
Nice. Awesome. Well, congrats, man. Anytime you write and publish a book, that's a huge accomplishment. And I love the content. It's been fun talking about it today. So as we wrap up here, Matt, is there any other kind of big picture thought we didn't get to that you want to mention, or is there kind of a first step you want to leave people with if they kind of know they need to kind of up their discipleship game, or what's kind of your closing thought today?
Yeah, when it comes to the personal side of things, I mean, sure, there's the easy side of what every author is supposed to say, like go buy the book. No, the reality though past that is far more important, which is seek out community. I think it's one of the things that our culture unfortunately lacks. I was talking with somebody from our church the other day, and I said one of the biggest shifts I've seen in the past 10 years is that when a pastor 10 years ago would say something and someone in the congregation disagreed with it, obviously heresy is a different conversation, but something political or something that was just a matter of opinion, If a parishioner disagreed with it, they would come have a conversation on Monday morning with their pastor. They'd want to learn more. And I said at the time, 10 years ago, I hated that. If I'm totally honest, I didn't want to get the emails. I didn't want people coming in on Monday. I just wanted to, it's like, hey, I preached. What's your problem? Now I would absolutely give anything to have that back, because today what we so often do is someone hears something they disagree with and they break community, they break fellowship, and they go find a different place. And my encouragement, first and foremost, especially to the longtime Christian listener, is be in community. It is uncomfortable at times, but iron sharpening iron is not a comfortable process. Have the conversation, be in community. Don't forsake meeting together because of a political disagreement, because we see that way too much. Don't forsake meeting together because of something practical like that. Have a conversation. So that's a huge piece. The other side of things is something that I've been working on to try to help churches have this conversation. Is once the book is out on October 18th, anybody will have a way to email me and be able to get some bonus material, some slides, that sort of thing. If you wanted to go through the book as a church, as a class, that sort of thing, Sunday school or otherwise, there's material that will be available for free to be able to walk through that with your congregation and try to help them walk into the path of discipleship is kind of my goal behind that. So two encouragements there, but that's kind of where I come down to on this one.
Well, Matt, I love the content. I love your heart for this. And it's a topic that's clearly relevant and needed right now. So thanks for writing the book and for your heart behind it again, and for being here today. It's been great talking about it. So everybody go follow, and try to do a small group or Sunday school class discussion with your church. I think it'd be really great for all of our churches. So Matt, thanks so much for your time, man. Really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thank you so much. No, I appreciate it. This is one of my favorite podcasts to listen to, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Well, Pastor Matt with the killer mustache, it was great getting to know you, my friend. Thanks for being on with us, and I hope you listeners enjoyed the conversation as well. And hey, as we were recording this, I didn't realize that we were going to be releasing this episode on the same day that his book releases. So if you're listening the week that we're releasing this, right now is your first chance to pick up Follow on Amazon, or if you're somewhere local in Kansas, you might be able to find it in your local bookstores. So I encourage you to snatch up a copy. Let's support Matt, and it is a resource that I think you can really benefit from. And Matt's just a great guy with a great style and some things that we can all learn from. Discipleship is such an important topic, obviously for local churches, but also for those of us involved with USMB. It's really important to us that on a national level, that we do our best to resource you with resources that are helpful in your leadership. So this would be a great example of that. All right, and with that, I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up for today. So thanks again so much for listening, and I hope the fall weather is beginning to settle in wherever you are listening. Have a great week ahead, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time here on Lead Pods.
Thanks for listening to Lead Pods. Make sure you don't miss an episode by subscribing to our show wherever you're listening today. Learn more by visiting usmb.org, and be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We'll see you next time as we learn more practical tools to increase our impact together.